Welcome to Gracefully Graying. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. Today on Gracefully Graying, we will be discussing the important issue of elder abuse with my guests, Michigan Supreme Court Justice Megan Cavanagh and Katharyn Barron from the Public Administration Division of the Attorney General's Office. Welcome. Justice Cavanagh, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you first for having me. I'm happy, glad to be here, glad to be back. So I was elected in November of 18 to the Michigan Supreme Court and have been serving since January of 19. Before that, I practiced appellate law before taking the bench, and before being a lawyer, I was an environmental engineer. But since I've been on the bench, coming up on 3 years now, obviously, I think most people know we hear, cases that are appealed to us, but a little bit lesser known is that we do have a large role to play in the administration of our trial courts. And each of the justices have different liaison roles in that respect. And so I'm the liaison for our tribal courts. We have 12 federally recognized tribes in Michigan. The regulatory agencies I'm also the liaison for the regulatory agencies for our judges and lawyers, the Judicial Tenure Commission and the Attorney Grievance Commission. I'm co-liaison with my colleague Justice Beth Clement for child welfare in Michigan. And then most relevant to today is I'm co-liaison with Justice Richard Bernstein to the Elder Abuse Task Force.
Tell us a little bit about the Supreme Court itself for our viewers.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, we're the highest appellate court in Michigan. There are 7 justices that are elected to serve in that role, and we. Like I said, our probably most well-known role is hearing cases and deciding cases that affect the law in Michigan. We hear, I'm not sure if I have the stats right, but we make some kind of, grant some kind of relief, whether it's hearing a case, issuing an opinion, or deciding cases through orders or some other way of I would say about 1,200 to 1,300 cases a year in one form or another. That doesn't mean a full-blown argument in that. But so we do, that is our big role. Obviously, the important role that we play is an independent third branch of government. But as I mentioned also, we are responsible for administering and serving as administrator for our 242 trial courts in Michigan, which is, includes your district court and your circuit court, family court, probate court. And that's a really important role that we play and that we take very seriously, because very few people get their case up in front of the Supreme Court. But the public, the citizens of Michigan, interact with their trial courts on a day-to-day basis. And we have a role to play to make sure that those courts are functioning the way that they should, that they have the support that they need from us to best serve the public, to be accessible and engaged in their communities. And so that's a big role that the Supreme Court plays.
Katharyn, tell our viewers about your background and role at the Public Administration Division of the Michigan Attorney General's Office.
Thank you, Henry. Happy to do that. First, thanks for the opportunity to be on your show, Gracefully Graying. I like to think I'm gracefully graying. And I love your tagline, living life fully. That's really what we're all trying to do. So I've been with the Attorney General's office for nearly 30 years. I spent considerable time in the consumer protection.
You're a lifer.
I am a lifer in a good way, Henry, in a good way. At the end of 2019, I became the state public administrator. And in that role, I oversee about 100 of our appointed county public administrators. The Public Administration Division and these county public administrators deal with no known heir cases. That's where an individual dies without a will and they don't have any heirs. That's a fancy way to say no family that's going to inherit. We make sure there are indeed no known heirs because sometimes they're there. We just need to find them. And we make sure that the estate administration expenses are reasonable. If we can't find heirs, and we do work really hard to find heirs, but if we can't find heirs, the money ends up going to the state.
Justice Cavanagh, what was the reason for creating the task force on elder abuse?
I think it was a recognition of that we have an obligation, not just the courts, but the Attorney General's office and all the other stakeholders or people that are affected, that we have an obligation to make sure that those who are most vulnerable are supported and are protected. And you know, we all have different roles to play in that. I mean, part of what I think is really awesome, and we'll get into that a little bit more, is how broad the knowledge is across the task force, and how many different areas in not only in the judicial branch or the legislative branch or the executive branch and the public sector and the private sector, how big of a role we all can play to make sure that those who are most vulnerable, most subject to abuse, have the protection. You know, what can we do as a society and as institutions and organizations to make sure that they're protected?
Justice Cavanagh, tell us about your role with the task force.
Sure. So as I just mentioned, you know, this is across a number of different branches of government and practice areas and different organizations. For my role, and I share that with my colleague Justice Richard Bernstein, is to show the support and commitment of the court to ensuring that the systems that we're responsible for, the systems that we can play a role in, and the changes that we can make and protections we can afford through the court system, is that they have the support and the commitment of the Supreme Court, as I had mentioned earlier, in that largely administrative function. We do have a role to play in how we can help, whether it be through court rules or task forces or, working through problems, fixing a form, the sort of day-to-day minute detail, not just the idea of, we should protect our vulnerable, elders, but also how we can do that on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like, on a Wednesday morning in, Oakland County Circuit Court? How do we fix that? Or how do we help, right? What's going to make that process better? And so we wanted to be connected to that and be supportive of that from the Supreme Court. So Justice Bernstein and I gladly signed on and are supportive.
Katharyn, tell our viewers about the role of your office with the task force.
Thanks, Henry. The Attorney General's office really leads the task force. The task force and all things that deal with protecting the vulnerable are really a high priority for Attorney General Nessel. And commensurate with that high priority, she's invested a lot of resources. Since January of this year, I've had the pleasure, and it really is a pleasure because this is a wonderful group of people, of leading the task force. But attorneys from 4 different divisions in the office, and there are about 20 legal divisions, work on the task force, and they have major roles. So in addition to the division I'm in, public administration, our financial crimes division has attorneys that work on the task force, our healthcare fraud division, our health and education and family services division, and we also pull from other divisions in the office. So as part of the lead of the task force, it's important to me that we provide that lead and the resources. All of the committees have an assistant attorney general working on them, not necessarily leading them, but working on them and the knowledge that the office brings.
What is the composition of the task force, Katharyn?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked it. It's so broad. There are more, and your viewers can go online to get this information. In a little bit, I'll share my screen and show how they can do that. We have more than 55 different organizations and 100 individuals from the public sector, the private sector, non-governmental offices. So on the state level, the Supreme Court is involved, and through the Supreme Court, the State Court Administrative Office, the Attorney General, of course. But then we also have the Department of Health and Human Services. That's where Adult Protective Services lives. The Department of Insurance and Financial Services, the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, the Department of Civil Rights. We have law enforcement partners, and in the law enforcement area, you have MSP, the Michigan State Police, Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan, the Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs of Police, legislators. We have on the federal level, Congress Roman Dingle. We have state representatives, Graham Filler, Kyra Bolden, Paul Wono. So you get the idea. It's very broad. In the private sector, we have the Michigan Bankers Association, the Credit Union League, Nursing Home Association, AARP, Area Agencies on Aging, the State Ombudsman Program. You get the idea. Very broad. I can't say enough good things about these professionals.
It sounds amazingly broad. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're not only broad, they're passionate, they're dedicating to leaving this world a better place than they found it. They really are a joy to work with.
Justice Cavanagh, tell us how the pandemic affected the courts, and in particular, the probate courts in Michigan.
Sure. Where do we start, right? I mean, the pandemic affected the courts significantly, right? Like it affected all institutions and all individuals. Our chief likes to say, Chief Justice McCormick, that it was not the disruption that we wanted, but perhaps it was the disruption that we needed. I think obviously, we are, as an institution, the court system is very tied to tradition, and it should be, right. I mean, we're the branch that should stay pretty consistent across time, right? People need to know what to expect in the law and the institutions to protect their rights. So this was very disruptive, right? I think it really turned upside down what we as courts did, and what we thought we could do, and so we all, like everyone else, had to adapt. And I do have to say, our trial courts, including our probate courts, perhaps especially our probate courts. As I mentioned, those courts where people are interacting with them on a day-to-day basis, is that they had to be incredibly flexible and adapt incredibly quickly to make sure that if the physical doors of the courtroom couldn't be opened, that at least the virtual doors could be, and trying to ensure access to the court, right? Because the world didn't necessarily stop, or the need for the courts didn't stop just because of the pandemic and because a number of things sort of shut down or were placed on pause. There were still children that needed protection from or children that needed to be returned to their parents, or, guardianships that needed to be filed. And so the courts had to adapt to that, and they really, really did. I can't say enough of how much I admire and respect what our trial courts were able to do with this thing that nobody was prepared for, right? Nobody planned on it, certainly, but we weren't really prepared individually or as an institution for it. And so the one thing that we had done that did help in that transition is not anticipating the pandemic at all, but prior to, the court had given every court in the state, all the trial courts, Zoom licenses. And then after the pandemic hit, we actually extended that. We made sure that our tribal courts all had Zoom licenses as well, which is, now what are we? Feels like 14 years later, maybe we're 18 months later, something like that, is sort of becoming a new norm, right? Is to be able to have virtual hearings where possible, where accessible, and because there are some that aren't, but we had to adapt to what the new world was. And importantly, from the Supreme Court's perspective, while we were making sure that we could, to the extent possible, keep the doors open and really keep communication open, right? I mean, if we remember way back to March of last year, different parts of the state were experiencing this in a very different way. So our trial courts and our judges up in the UP weren't necessarily experiencing some of the same issues that we were able to keep their physical courtrooms open longer than some down here in the lower peninsula or in southeastern Michigan. And so we needed to be flexible and adapt to the realities of that. So our trial judges were great at communicating of what's working, what's not working, where do we need help, what can the Supreme Court and the State Court Administrative Office do to facilitate that. And the court itself, recognizing while we're doing this, that we also need to be aware of and keeping track of some of the lessons that we're learning from this. So we established a lessons learned committee. We established a committee on open courts and virtual proceedings so that we could, collect this information and learn from it. I think we all were hoping and probably expecting that we would have been on the other side of this by now. But unfortunately, we're not. Certainly not recently. Some of our trial courts have had to limit in person as well, just most recently. So we had to adapt as an institution and as individual courts, and our trial courts did a tremendous job. A lot of, a very steep learning curve, a lot of bumps in the road to make sure that they could still keep their doors open and keep serving the public and be accessible and transparent while doing that.
Justice Cavanagh, continuing on the issue of the pandemic, which as we're speaking is still ongoing, what if any changes caused by the COVID pandemic do you think will be ongoing?
Well, I think the reality is that we have, virtual proceedings are here to stay in some form. We've, like I said, through our experience and through some of these committees and what we've heard from judges and lawyers and the public and all the users of the court system through this is that some things work really well and should stay, and it's an improvement by doing things virtually, and some just don't work. Some can't, right? Constitutionally, a number, in the criminal arena that they can't work virtually. But some things where just some of the things that our court system can do need to be done in person, right? I'm thinking of, we have over 200 problem solving or treatment courts that are really fantastic, and they do a lot of really important work, and they have tremendous results of trying to figure out that upstream solution. Why are we not treating the reason why people are showing up in court or are running into showing up in the criminal justice system. Why don't we treat the underlying cause of that? And we have tremendous results with courts all across our state that are doing some really important work with that. But a big part of that work is the human face-to-face connection. And so some of those, trying to figure out how we can keep those going, they don't adapt very well to virtual proceedings, as an example. But there are some that do. I think that we have found that an increased participation in particularly proceedings involving children in child welfare proceedings, in juvenile proceedings, landlord-tenant cases, just some district court proceedings, because people are able to show up and participate without disrupting their lives and their day, right? They don't have to take a day off of work. They don't have to find childcare. They can, appear for a status conference or to check in with the judge or to be a witness. I was just heard from my brother-in-law recently, who's a teacher over on the west side of the state, that he was subpoenaed to give some testimony in a case involving one of his former students. And, he has a classroom full of second graders that, he can't, it's not that easy to find. It's not easy at all to find substitute teachers. And he was able to, pop out for 20 minutes as opposed to having to take a whole day to do that. And that's an important role to play. Similarly, which is the best day in the court system. Yesterday was adoption day. And I got to participate in 3 adoptions in Oakland County. And in virtually all of them, there were so many people supporting these children and their families that were able to attend because of virtual proceedings, including these kids' teachers and their family from out of state and their neighbors. And, so that's a tremendous benefit. You couldn't have fit, 100 people in the courtroom. They wouldn't have been able to take the day off to do that. So there's a lot that is working, and that's really where we are right now as a court, is trying to sort of gather that information and hear from everybody what their input is about what should remain and what needs to go back, what needs to change. But I think the reality is that, we found that we can adapt and that there are benefits, and we need to maximize those benefits by retaining, virtual proceedings in a number of cases.
Speaking as an attorney, there are many, many positives, and just the ability to cover motions or matters in different courts without having to drive from court to court is a wonderful time saver for both the judges, the litigants, and the attorneys. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Katharyn, moving on, tell us about a couple of things the task force has been doing since we talked last in September of 2019.
Well, Henry, the task force has been really busy, so it's going to be tough for me to limit it to just a couple of things, but I'll hit a couple of highlights. So in December of 2020, the legislature passed the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act. And you're like, well, that's the legislature. Well, that legislation was put together by a team working from the Elder Abuse Task Force. Remember before I said part of our team members are the associations representing the banks and credit unions. So this act has the potential to be a game changer. It makes banks and credit unions mandated reporters of suspected financial exploitation. And it just became effective in September of 2021. So that was really a major thing and a major accomplishment. Another thing, a little more recent, just this last June of 2021, through a bipartisan team of legislators, we introduced a package of legislation. It's House Bills 4847 through 4850. And this package accomplishes the remainder of our first initiatives. And in a bit, I can talk about those first initiatives and what's on there. And then just to stretch it a little bit, I'm an attorney, you asked me to, I'm going to give you 3 things. In late July, released our second set of initiatives. And if I may pause here and show your audience how to get more information on these matters, because there's just a wealth of information on the Elder Abuse Task Force. And so I'd like to do that. Here we go. So this is the homepage for the Elder Abuse Task Force. The quickest way to get here is mi.gov/elder abuse. And then from that homepage, you can get to the Elder Abuse Task Force. So on here, you'll see there's just an introduction about the task force. And if you scroll down ever so slowly, which I didn't do, you'll see just a wealth of information. And I talked about the initiatives. So you'll see those here. You've got the first initiatives, and you'll see we're very transparent. You know, the Supreme Court talks again and again about the importance of being transparent. The Elder Abuse Task Force, we believe that transparency is important. So when we launched, we put our initiatives up there. We're not report writing. You know, that's been done and tried with task forces, especially elder abuse task forces. We publish our initiatives, and when we accomplish one, we check it off. So you'll see our second initiative right here, I just talked about that, mandated reporting for banks and credit unions. We're also doing a lot of education surrounding that. We believe you not only need to accomplish the initiative, the goal, but then the importance of education, you need to educate so that that's really carried through. So those are our first initiatives, but you'll also see on the Elder Abuse Task Force, sorry to jump around there so much, Anya, but our second set of initiatives. So I mentioned the 4-bill package accomplished the remainder of our first initiatives. Well, when we introduced that and got it to the legislature, then it was time to publish our second initiatives. And actually, we're well on our way to accomplishing, and we'll issue a newsletter at the beginning of next year talking about how we have accomplished the comprehensive training. That's number 2. I mentioned it's important to do training related to the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, local level multidisciplinary teams. We've done that, and then encourage and facilitate probate court referrals. We've done that. We've published a form. We've made it available on the website. So there really is a wealth of information here. I mentioned the newsletter. Your viewers can sign up for the newsletter by clicking on that link. And that's really the single best way to keep current on what the task force is doing, because in addition to these initiatives, we're doing a lot of other things. You won't even see on the initiatives the education stuff, and we have a lot there. So just wanted to give your viewers a flavor of what's available on the Elder Abuse Task Force website.
This is such an important topic. We've reached a break point, so we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to continue this conversation on the Elder Abuse Task Force with my guests, Justice Megan Cavanagh from the Michigan State Supreme Court, and from Katharyn with regard to the issues from the perspective of the Michigan Attorney General's office. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.